Hello, good morning, and welcome to the latest installment of the EDIACI webinar series, this time co-organized with the Synergy Project, both members of the Ideal Cluster. So just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please turn off your camera and mute your microphone. If you wish to speak, indicate this in the chat in the chat with your question, please. Webinar recording. This session is recorded. Access to the recording via shared linked post event will be done, and feel free to review and share. The presentations will also be shared after the event is finished. And please, if you have a question at any point, do feel free to ask. They may be addressed live in the Q&A session, or any unanswered questions will be answered afterwards as well. So, mind the gap towards a comprehensive European Union Act on Indoor Air Quality. Healthy air is enshrined as a fundamental right in 19 EU member states, yet despite indoor air pollution levels often being 2 to 3 times higher than outdoor levels, and in extreme cases up to 100 times higher, there is no specific EU legislation governing indoor air quality. The current regulatory landscape remains fragmented, addressing only certain pollutants in specific environments. At an international level, the WHO Indoor Air Quality Guidelines provide the only recognized reference for IAQ standards, while the recent revision of the Ambient Air Quality Directives offers a robust European-level legislation for outdoor air quality. There remains a significant gap for indoor spaces. Air quality, however, does not stop at your doorstep. Despite this uneven patchwork, several national level initiatives across the EU member states and beyond could serve as a model for a broader European framework. For example, France mandates IAQ monitoring in establishments frequented by vulnerable populations, such as schools. Please, somebody has their microphone on. I'll just be muting them. Thank you. Given this context, the EDIACI project is convening a webinar titled Mind the Gap Towards a Comprehensive European Union Act on Indoor Air Quality to explore the following questions. Which national level and regional level frameworks in Europe serve as exemplary models for a comprehensive approach to indoor air quality? And how could they inform a European-wide strategy? What are the main obstacles, whether legal, political, or technical, to the formation of an EU-wide legislation on indoor air quality? And what research or data is needed to support its development? And finally, what should a comprehensive EU legislative act on indoor air quality encompass, and how can it effectively address the diverse challenges across member states? So with that, I'm excited to say, joining us today for this timely discussion, we are proud and honored to introduce our outstanding panel for the latest installment in the EDIACI webinar series, co-organized with the Synergy Project. Starting from the left, we have Francesca Brady, Frankie, Expert Advisory Board member from Global Air Quality Standards, GO AQS. Then next we have Francesco Scuderi, the Secretary General of Eurovent. Then we have Panayotis Charslaridis, or Akis, Senior Policy Advisor at the European Federation of Allergy and Airway Diseases Patients Association. And finally, my dear colleague and friend Pasquale Avino, Associate Professor in Analytical Chemistry and Environmental Chemistry at the University of Malasis. And with that, let's do a quick run through of the agenda. We just did the welcome and introduction. Then we'll move to Universal Clean Air with Frankie, the Eurovent Manifesto with Francesco, supporting indoor air quality policy formulation with Akis, and translating indoor air quality science into policy with Pasquale. And finally, we'll head to the policy discussion, and you can ask your questions immediately after with a 15-minute session there and a closing and concluding remarks. So with that, the floor is yours, Frankie. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Alex, and good morning, everyone. So the Global Open Air Quality Standards, or GOAQS, is a global initiative dedicated to setting universal, transparent, and science-backed air quality benchmarks, focusing first on our internal environments. Its goal is simple but vital: ensuring that everyone, regardless of where they live or their socioeconomic background, has access to clean, healthy air. Next slide, please. So why do we need GoAQS? Well, it's because the current system has some pretty major flaws. So firstly, whilst outdoor air quality has clearer regulations, indoor air quality remains largely ungoverned with minimal guidance and oversight. Secondly, finding information about air quality and knowing what good looks like is really difficult and confusing. So from country to country, the goalposts change. So take air quality indexes, AQIs, for example. Scales in India range from 0 to 500, which is the same in Spain. But where I am in the UK, it's 1 to 10. In somewhere like Australia, it's 0 to 149. So we may speak different languages, but really that's no excuse for these indexes. The same inconsistency then applies to targets and limits. So for example, the annual PM2.5 limits in the UK are 25 micrograms per cubic meter. In the US, they're 35. In India, they're 40. The WHO says 10. The list goes on. And finally, air quality discussions continue to remain siloed, but we cannot talk about indoor air quality without considering the pressures on sustainability and energy efficiency. They must go hand in hand, but also standards should reflect this. Next slide, please. So GoAQS is here to fix these gaps with an approach that is open source and free. So no barriers, no gatekeeping. Air quality standards should be accessible to everyone. Collaborative and holistic, so developed by academics, or not developed, sorry, just by academics or policymakers, but a coalition of researchers, public sector partners, and industry leaders. And then finally, consistent. So this single universal framework that speaks one common language for air quality worldwide. Next slide, please. So who is GoAQS? Well, we're a global coalition of scientists, air quality experts, and industry leaders working together to bridge this gap between standards themselves that exist and also between standards and real-world applications. By partnering with businesses and organizations, many of which are listed on this slide, we ensure that these standards don't just exist on paper, but they drive real change. Next slide, please. So I kept it nice and short for everyone. Thank you so much for listening. We would love to continue the conversation, so you can scan the QR code or connect with us via email and social media. Together, let's create a world where everyone breathes the same clean air. Thank you.
I think it's an absolutely wonderful initiative that's starting to pick up pace. I also must thank you as the webinar moderator for a very short and sweet and impactful presentation. Now we will move ahead to Francesco. Francesco, please, the floor is yours to discuss the Eurovent manifesto. Francesco, your microphone.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone. We can directly go to the next slide. So a very short introduction about Eurovent. Eurovent is the European Industry Association for Indoor Climate Process Cooling and Full Cold Chain Technologies, in short, HVAC and R. And of course, within HVAC and R, indoor air quality plays a major role. Next, please. We have been founded in 1958, so some years ago. We represent more than 110 manufacturers. We have members from 25 different European countries, and all in all, the magnitude of our industry is a 30+ billion turnover and over 150,000 people we represent. Next, please. Ahead of the past elections, Eurovent published its manifesto 2024-2029, and you can download it, both the short and full version. And all in all, this manifesto aimed to provide the future policymakers, which now are the current policymakers, with a set of clear indications from the industry. Next, please. All in all, we think that A sustainable heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration industry is very much needed for a sustainable Europe. Next, please. And for having this sustainable Europe, thanks to the sustainable industry, we provided three clear indications to policymakers, to the future policymakers, which today are the current policymakers. So create a frictionless single market for sustainable products, focus on the implementation of the European Green Deal policies, and develop a real and forceful European industrial strategy. Next, please. Frictionless single market, well, we see that a new wave of harmonization is very much needed for creating indeed a true level playing field for sustainable products. So within this manifesto, we requested this frictionless single market, applying, of course, to all our products and to all the topics we represent. Next, please. Focusing on the implementation of the European Green Deal is very much relevant and needed. The industry, in a pragmatic way, needs stability. So the industry needs that what has been already defined within the past Green Deal needs to be properly implemented. And indeed, within this framework, the implementation and the proper implementation of the EPBD approved last year and is very much needed and needs to be properly implemented and transposed at the national level. And within the EPBD, we'll see later, major role and plays the definition of indoor air quality criteria. Next, please. Of course, the industry needs a proper harmonization, needs a proper implementation of the Green Deal, but we asked the future commission, the current commission, to develop a strong and forceful European industrial strategy. Without this, our really forward-thinking industry would be alone. So we need to have this properly included in the next pieces of legislation. Next. Thanks a lot.
Francesco, thank you for that in-depth look, quick in-depth look at the Eurovent manifesto. It's been a pleasure to read, actually, from my part, from a policy point of view. And I think industry is going to have a very big part to play in a future European-wide framework. So thank you very much for your intervention there. Now we will be heading to Panayotis Akis from the Synergy Project and also the leader of the Ideal Cluster Working Group 1. Akis, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Alex. And yes, we can kick off with the presentation. Yeah, that's the cover. Synergy, it's a long name, disrupting noxious synergies of indoor air pollutants and their impact in childhood health and well-being using advanced intelligent multi-sensing and green interventions, one of the Ideal Cluster projects. Yeah, go ahead. So a bit of context, because in the context of this cluster, of course, we perceive indoor air quality as a significant public health issue that impacts us all and needs interventions that will protect everyone. We have more than 3.2 million deaths per year, and that's data from WHO from 2020, and links with multiple diseases, including respiratory diseases, chronic cardiovascular diseases, lung cancer, diabetes, and so on. In the last decade or a couple of decades, there is increasing acknowledgement and attention at the European and global level. Yet, as Francesca mentioned in the first presentation, indoor air quality is largely lagging behind compared to policies about ambient air, for example, as this is a largely ungoverned field at the EU level. Next slide, please. A bit of introductory words about the consortium. The Ideal Cluster, it's composed by 7 EU-funded projects in the topic of indoor air quality and health, including more than 120 organizations participating. You can see the logos of the projects there. I am also a senior policy advisor at IFA, the European Federation of Allergy and Airways Diseases Patients Associations, which represents people with allergy, asthma, and COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in Europe, advocating, among others, for better indoor air quality in EU policies, including across policies like in buildings, construction products, ambient air quality, and climate. And of course, as mentioned earlier, we perceive poor air quality as a huge risk for the onset and exacerbation of diseases for our community. And exposure, it's also associated with reduced academic performance and productivity, for example, among students. Now, going to the synergy, the purpose of synergy, the objective has been to identify and quantify synergistic effects and interactions between different pollutants affecting health, focusing on the school setting. So that's the focus. The scope in terms of pollutants has been the chemicals and biological pollutants, including allergens and microbes. That we are exposed, all of us, every day, especially children during the school hours. In terms of the sample size, about 3,500 school-aged children are planned to be involved around the ages of between 8 and 9, either healthy as a control group or children with allergy, asthma, and atopic diseases, other atopic diseases. The setting again is schools, and more particularly, we are working in 5 European countries: Finland, France, Georgia, Greece, and the UK. Synergy, among other, leads the cluster work on the science translation for policy and practice, together with our colleagues at K-Health in Air. And we work providing science-based input for policy making. That's our goal through the cluster, including policy strategy, the development of policy strategy, the development of policy briefs, and I will discuss about it a bit later. The organization of workshops, all of that in support of the EU zero pollution ambition expressed a few years ago. Next slide, please. Yes. Now, discussing about the policy brief, it was published, the first one, in October 2024. Just a few highlights here. We did a review of overarching issues around the impact of indoor air quality, looking at specifically the symptoms, but also the different vulnerable groups that are exposed to, are disproportionately vulnerable to indoor air pollution. We identified significant gaps, of course, in the knowledge on the synergistic effects of indoor air pollutants on health, just because that's for a number of reasons, including the fact that human activities like cooking, heating, tobacco, smoking, and other polluting activities happen simultaneously, and therefore there are several different sources and pollutants involved. There's always an interplay between outdoor and indoor air pollution that we should not overlook, but also we need to factor in the role of insulation and ventilation. And as previous speakers have highlighted, there's a lack of cohesive indoor air quality approach at European level, and as a specifically a delay in EU initiatives as they were announced in the Zero Pollution Action Plan. At the same time, there's a coexistence of several national policies, whether they are standards, reference concentrations, guide, and action values across Europe. And there's a link for more information there. Next slide, please. And we propose a few recommendations based on our findings. I'm sorry. Of course, the need for a comprehensive strategic plan for indoor air quality, and that bonds well with the topic of today's webinar, of course. based on a legal basis for EU action on indoor air quality and health, connecting the dots between bringing a bit more cohesion to EU policies related to indoor air quality. Also adopting a common legal definition for indoor air quality in order to harmonize criteria and supporting innovation, making it accessible for all. Next steps, it's about the publication of the second policy brief, which is in preparation. The scope will be zooming in on children in educational settings, and it's planned for release at the Q4 of 2025. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Akis, for that look at the Synergy project and the Ideal Cluster, especially the work in Working Group 1. Just to say that it's been an honor as well from my side to be able to contribute to that policy brief. And I think it's going to be very impactful. And we're now working together on the next policy brief. So please keep your eyes out. We're happy to share our contributions there. And next, we will be going to my colleague and friend, Pasquale. Pasquale, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for the presence. We are talking about a very important point. It means the translation of the levels of the guidelines into policy, and this is a very big issue. Let me show some points. Next slide, please. So this is the situation about the indoor air quality papers in Europe before starting the two important European project, Inquire and NDIACI. You see that there is a lot of publication, more than 7,000 publication in Europe between 2000 and 2020. There is different contribution for different countries, a lot of contribution, a lot of information, a lot of data, but the problem is this one. The next slide, please. Each country, each states of the European Union has different policies, has different legislation about indoor air quality. There is not one body, just one body, but different legislation. That means different levels for each compounds. If you can click, thanks. This is an example. How can we understand the meaning of the benzene, of formaldehyde, other compound, when each state has different levels? We are talking about for residential indoor air quality, not occupation. That was the first gap to overcome. The second one is to have just one legislation. In this way, the academia, the research centers play an important role to drive the European Union to get just only legislation. You can see the benzene. We have different levels. If you are talking about World Health Organization, or we have the same values for France. France is really active in this field. Every year, reevaluate the guideline levels. But if we compare the France, Netherlands, Belgium, Poland levels, they are different, and this is not a good policy for the European Union. So we with our work, particularly from this group, but we are talking about of course the DIACI project. I think the main goal is to drive the European Union a unique legislation in the Europe for the indoor air quality. We are talking for the residential indoor air quality. Next slide, please. Before leaving my speech for the question, I would like to invite all the participants to the conference we held in Campobasso in Italy at the end of June, where we talk about the effect of the climate change on the environment, talking about not only air quality, indoor and outdoor air quality, but also other important environmental parameters. Thank you very much, Alex, and we'll try to drive the Union to a unique legislation on this topic. We believe too much in this way.
Thank you for painting that patchwork so concisely. To be honest, I mean, looking at all of the different pieces of legislation, taking one particular pollutant, I think you've highlighted perfectly the patchwork that we currently have, where there's no one single standard, maybe apart from WHO. And obviously now taking that, we can turn to Franklin to go AQS. And to the panel. We're reaching the panel now, but our first question, so please, panelists, turn on your camera. I know Francesco might be having some difficulties with the camera, so his might not be on, but please, Pasquale, please turn on your camera. I think it's a great segue here towards the question for Frank and Go QS and their ambitions to create global air quality standards that ensures equal access to air for all. So Frankie, please. First question, indoor air quality often suffers from fragmented regulation, as Pasquale has just indicated, while outdoor air has seen cohesive standards. How do you see Go AQS and specifically the Go AQS initiative playing a role in bridging this regulatory gap at an EU level?
Yeah, so IAQ standards, yes, have been fragmented, if not non-existent in some cases. Particularly when you compare it to outdoor air quality. So Go AQS can address this disparity by promoting a consistent, comprehensive set of IAQ guidelines. And then in terms of bridging that regulatory gap, it's the unified framework that complements and supports existing EU policies. And the emphasis that I mentioned in the presentation on the open access and open guidelines means that all stakeholders, policymakers, industry players, general public can collaborate effectively. And I think that collaboration will foster this sharing of best practices and in theory accelerate the implementation of effective IAQ measures throughout the EU. So I think that's what the Go AQS initiative, that's the role that it will play with this fragmentation.
I think it's an absolutely important initiative, one, not just within obviously the EU, but making sure the research that we're doing extends beyond that. And just to say, obviously, it's really great to hear that there's a focus on equality and on equal access as well. I think that's a fundamental part of any legislation. Francesco, now heading to you and taking a look at industry. And taking this from an industry perspective, how can industry stakeholders, including those represented by Eurovent, collaborate with policymakers to develop and enforce these IAQ standards that Frankie has touched upon?
Well, thank you, Alex. In our case, I can easily say that within Eurovent, we've been extremely active, especially in the recent discussion on the new EPPD, which under the Article 13 provides a provision related to indoor air quality.
So what's the first thing you're going to do?
One is the speaker.
Get the charger.
One is speaking.
Sorry, Francesco, there was a microphone on. Please do continue.
Yeah. So indeed, just an example, the review of the EPBD, so the Energy Performance of Building Directive, is a great example on how the industry cooperated with the policymakers, providing real and evidence-based input, as well as with the member of the parliament for having something well fine-tuned with the needs of our society as well as with the needs of the industry. And on top of that, of course, a part of our activity is not just the outreach to policymakers, but is also providing a comprehensive and proper education to the market. Just as an example, we recently hosted an indoor air quality conference in London, where more than 100 people seated together and elaborated on the indoor air quality in the educational building. So just a couple of examples. Thank you.
Francesco, I mean, especially the focus on educational buildings and children, obviously, which are a vulnerable population, I think it's absolutely fundamental. So it's really great to hear that you had that conversation, and we'd love to hear some of those key contributions that you got during that discussion. Heading to Akis now. Akis, from your work on tackling noxious synergies in IAQ as part of the Synergy project, what lessons can be learned regarding the political or technical barriers to implementing effective IAQ policies in the EU, and how can they be addressed? Please, Akis.
Yes, thank you. I do believe that one of the biggest challenges is the perception of indoor air quality as an issue of purely national competence that has dominated in the public policy discourse and has led to a lower priority for EU level action. However, we think that the treaties give the EU ample space, but also strong responsibility to protect public health. And the evidence on the health burden for several decades now have shown that indoor air quality is indeed an emerging concern of public health. So secondly, but linked to the first point, is that many European countries over the years have developed their own measures, policies, and even cultures on indoor air quality. Of course, any measure that protects people from indoor air pollution is very much welcome, but the stark differences in the approach among countries also points to the lack of a harmonized EU-level framework. As an example, there is no commonly acceptable legal definition for indoor air quality. And while we understand how complicated this work would be, so coming up with a commonly acceptable definition, given the differences across Europe, so the difference in the type of buildings, public perception on indoor air quality, the pre-existing policies, the actual policy priorities, and so on, we think that a common definition would be indispensable to ensure a harmonized framework across countries. And on the technical side, just to finish, we have seen a disconnect between existing EU regulations related to indoor air quality and standards developed in the framework of the European Committee of Standardization. So regarding monitoring and analyzing pollutants and assessing pollutants. So I think that it's also one of our recommendations to bring those together, closer aligned at least. Thank you.
Thank you for that very that dissection of the current status on indoor air quality. I think that cultural element is something really important as well to highlight, that there's a different culture when it comes to how we see indoor air quality across Europe, and there's a need for a unified approach to indoor air quality, which we hope GoAQS will support. We're going to head now to my colleague building on this and see what role academia can play here. So how can academia, Pasquale, contribute to the development of an EU-wide IAQ legislation, and what are the key research gaps that need to be addressed? Please, Pasquale, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex. How can academia contribute? But I mean, this is quite easy. It means we can do measurement, we can do develop guidelines. But the first gap we have to overcome is our mentality. What I mean that until few years ago, we maybe also today we consider the outdoor pollution is more dangerous than everything. Instead, indoor we pass 89 hours per day. We pass 80-90% of our life in indoor. So indoor it becomes a very important parameter, very important force for this system. So when we started to make the measurements, we find a very strong a tall wall about this field. We started, I remember, 5 or 6 years ago with measurement in schools during the secondary school. The first step, the first question I received was what kind of levels we use. We use the levels from the occupational levels, but there is pupils, there is young boy, girls. There is not workers, so we cannot use that guidelines, that values. So this was the first gap to overcome the mentality, the idea that the levels in the workplace can be used everywhere. It is not true. In residential places, we have pupils, we have aged person, so we can have a different mentality, a different measurements, at different levels, and this is the first overcome that academia could be the driving force to pass this step.
Thank you, Pascal. I think you make a very important point there, that there needs to be tailored to specific populations with specific vulnerabilities. And at the moment, currently, we've created maybe, which Go AQS, I know heading to Go AQS now, has this level of dissection there. And we as well at the Ideal Cluster are trying to do very much the same thing with our policy briefs. So I'm going to head now to Francesca for my next question to Frankie here. Frankie, what are the main I think I've gone one too many there, so excuse me. Frankie, Go AQS emphasizes equality and equity, which we kind of touched on before, ensuring everyone, regardless of ethnicity, income, or location, breathes the same clean air. How can these principles be practically integrated into an EU-wide IAQ framework, IAQ Act, and what role can Go AQS play in advocating for these values?
Yeah, so integrating those two key points of equality and equity into an EU-wide IAQ Act requires a structured approach, but also taking into account that there are disparities in air quality access, but there are also gaps in monitoring and enforcement. So the part about the practical application is really important. And I think that's where sometimes and historically there have been gaps in terms of the practical realities. So as Panayiotis said, we need a common definition for IAQ and we need a set of minimum standards across all EU member states. In addition to that, there needs to be this equitable access to IAQ monitoring and technology. So it's not commonplace to have them in all public buildings, but there should be some sort of mandate, but also a way to make the technology affordable. And then in an ideal world, subsidies, financial incentives for improving, particularly low-income areas. And then I know Francesco mentioned this before, but targeted regulations for vulnerable populations. So schools, nursing homes, social housing, having stricter IAQ standards. And then, I mean, it's a big topic at the moment in the UK with landlords and housing authorities for social housing, how you protect those low-income tenants. And then this approach, as I was saying before, the more holistic approach to say, okay, we need to address IAQ, but how do we do that practically by integrating it with energy efficiency and sustainability goals? So linking these IAQ requirements to the energy efficient renovations like the EU Green Deal, the renovation wave strategy. How do we incorporate both these things in one go? And then finally, the awareness there needs to be some, like, the whole problem with IAQ historically has been a lack of awareness, and we all think that outdoors is the really critical need that needs to be addressed, when actually we spend upwards of 90% of our time indoors. It can be 3 to 5 times more polluted. So we need these kind of awareness campaigns for everyone, so from the general public all the way up to policymakers. And then I think GoAQS's role in all of this is a passionate advocate, supporter of all these things, so providing that science-based universal framework that can be adopted in an IAQ Act, but also driving that cross-sector collaboration. So, I mean, we would advocate for public and private partnerships, and then you start to be able to implement equitable IAQ solutions, and then supporting data collection and monitoring and some sort of standardization with that to support a standard itself, and then influencing policy through advocacy and shouting about the good stuff. So I think, yeah, that's how GoAQS supports this and the practical ways in which to bring it to life.
That's a very strong initiative that you are conducting there. I really must say this focus on equality and equal access when it comes to both the technology to understand your indoor air quality as well as the awareness about the issue is a very strong, and we second your initiative there. We're going to head now to Eurovent, taking an industry look at this. What are the main challenges Eurovent has identified in implementing effective IAQ across diverse EU member states, and how can these challenges be addressed?
Yeah, Alex, thank you. First of all, must recognize that only now, within the new EPBD, we have some recognition about indoor air quality. As mentioned before by the other colleagues, nothing was really written before. So finally, we have a proper recognition of indoor air quality, including its definition. Challenges are many. Challenges are, of course, many. First of all, still referring to the EPBD, is that the EPBD is a directive which needs to be transposed at the national level. And on this point, Eurovent, together with its 16 national associations member, is trying to advocate for an harmonized as much as possible transposition of the EPBD, including the requirements for indoor air quality. And again, as mentioned also earlier by the other colleagues, before implementing effective IQ policies, we need to raise the awareness on IQ. If left or right in Europe, no one knows what's indoor air quality, we will never succeed. Just an example, a couple of days ago, I was attending a meeting in one of the European Commission buildings. Out of the blue, someone said that the CO2 level in this room is not so nice, correct, but some relevant expert from member states replied, there is only one way for improving, opening the window. And this is not the way for sorting out the problems related to indoor air quality. Thank you.
I think that's a very strong point there, that maybe there's a lack of awareness, which kind of Frankie touched upon before, and there's a need to ensure equal access to that awareness. I will push now to Akis on that, and a specific focus on vulnerable populations that Synergy and the Ideal Cluster have. So, Akis, how can policymakers ensure that vulnerable groups such as children, the elderly, and people with chronic conditions such as respiratory diseases are prioritized in IAQ policy formulation?
Yes, thank you, Alex. First of all, I cannot agree more with the need for greater awareness. So we can see again here a discrepancy between ambient air quality and indoor air quality, how much evidence and knowledge has been accumulated about the impact of ambient air pollution on health, but not so much about the impact of indoor pollution on health. So awareness and education are quite important, and actually this is also initiatives and campaigns where vulnerable people can drive and can be involved. Secondly, just listen to them. So involve those people in decisions, involve those people in projects, give them the floor at all levels, create the appropriate structure, the ones that can accommodate their input best. So it's not only that those people are the final users and the first victims, as we say, of indoor pollution, final users of buildings from one side, but also first victims of indoor pollution. It's also that the stories from the daily life, the struggles, show the human side of the issue, from which there can be truly valuable policy implications. There are people with severe types of allergy and asthma and other diseases for whom even opening the window is a risk, who have to have their emergency medication always within reach. So our message is that should take those people into account all along when making decisions for their lives.
The disability campaigners always say nothing about us without us. So you've made a really strong call there about nothing without us, nothing about us without us, and I couldn't fully agree more. Pasquale, our final question from the panel today, and I ask you to be short and sweet so we can head to our questions from the audience. How can the scientific community better collaborate with policymakers and industry stakeholders, which I guess this is an amalgamation of today, to ensure research findings are effectively translated into real-world solutions?
Thanks, Alex. And maybe you just answered to this question. It means this today is exactly the occurrence we are going to build for this problem. The two European projects running now, Inquire and then Diriaki go in this direction. It means there is just a good, strong collaboration between scientific community and the stakeholders, because the topic is really important. And then these two projects, with these two projects, the European Union, the polymakers are going in this direction. They understood that this topic is really important, because you talked about elderly population, subpopulation, sensitive population. They are they are affected by this problem. We spent, I said before, and I repeat again, we spent 80-90% of our life in indoor, and this indoor should be protected in some way better than outside. Of course, in some way, this is just an extrapolation, but we have to protect the indoor, because the effect of a bad indoor air quality is reflected on our human health.
Thank you for being short, sweet, as well as powerful and impactful. Now we head to, I know you've all been waiting to ask your questions and have them answered by the audience. Answered by the speakers, not by the audience. Please get involved, have your say. If you want to even take the floor, we can, but you have to be short and sweet and raise your hand. We have already a reserve of questions that we'll head straight to. The first one we have on our list is for Francesca. What are the main challenges to apply IAQ standards, and how these change, and how do these change depending on the region of the world? And she puts a specific example, low versus high income countries, which I think hits on this equal access idea.
It does. And it's a really good question. I think some of this answer that I'm going to give has already been touched on, but this standard definition for IAQ needs to be sorted before you can start applying it anywhere, really, low, high income countries. So that needs to be addressed. I think the low awareness and low priority is also an issue. Like, there are perceived to be bigger fires to be dealing with at the moment. There are specific issues, and this is perhaps not just, or not perhaps so relevant to the EU, but in low-income countries, there are households that burn fuel indoors for cooking and for heating, and you are just going to have this big disparity between quality of indoor environments, but also access to improvement. And that's kind of what I was touching on before. We need strategies to say, well, IAQ needs to be a certain standard and a certain quality. And we know for sure that some of these indoor environments are not going to be able to reach that just by virtue of how they're being used at the moment by people in those environments. So how do we get them to the minimum standard? And I think that part is missing and probably needs to be addressed in parallel, if not before this kind of IAQ standard comes into effect.
Couldn't agree more with that really strong statement there. There have been studies, right, by the WHO that particularly in low-income countries, there's a number of deaths that happen because of poor indoor air quality and burning of fuels that are, that are dirty fuels, for example, like petrol, kerosene, etc., for heating. And there's often gender disparities as well that I've heard as well, because it's very often the girls who are collecting firewood and the ones who are cooking and the ones who are. So thank you for making that really powerful statement there, Francesca. Francesco, heading to you. How can policymakers balance IAQ regulations with economic concerns, especially for small businesses and companies?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Well, on this point, together with the European Federation of Designers, REBA, we already published some indication on how it's already possible by making use of the current cost-effective technologies to have a proper indoor air quality without exceeding on the real cost. So I can easily say that if the policymakers would follow the state of the art, which is already cost-effective, this would not have any real financial impact, but would result in a great indoor air quality solutions. Thank you.
In fact, we did have the Spend Less, Breathe Better webinar where we talk about and we'll be having another one on low-cost sensor technology. So thank you very much for highlighting that, Francesco. Now we have the next question for Akis Panayotis from the Synergy Project. What have been the ideal and most surprising or challenging findings within the ideal cluster? So there's a focus on the ideal cluster regarding the translation from science to policy.
Yes, I have seen the question in the chat, and I think that I have tried to respond in written. Again, we're going back to the level of policy fragmentation, which is massive, and the weird fact that we do have pieces of legislation that can be related one way or another. With indoor air quality, for example, from the EPBD, from construction products regulation, from eco-labeling regulations, and so on, but not something coming from the pure, from the health sector, from the health policy domain. This is also a challenge for us, again, to bring everything together, to try to support the effort of bringing everything together. But it's also, I think, something that is absolutely necessary to ensure that the findings, the scientific findings that will start, that will be derived from this research, to be put in a practicable action oriented, and as some previous speakers mentioned, also tailored way, accommodating for different vulnerable communities.
I think that emphasis on tailored and in an accessible way is absolutely fundamental. I'm glad to be contributing to that with you, with those challenges of translating the science from these projects into policy, and we hope to share that with you soon. Pasquale, in your opinion, what are the most critical research gaps that still need to be addressed before IAQ regulations can be implemented in Europe? Pasquale, shall I repeat again? Shall I repeat again the question here for you? In your opinion, what are the most critical research gaps that still need to be addressed before IAQ regulations can be implemented in Europe? So what are the main research gaps, do you think, that currently exist?
I think the main research gaps is regards the mentality. I repeat, because we consider that the people consider that outdoor pollution is fundamental. It's fundamental, of course, but the problem is the indoor air quality is more dangerous, and the main gap what we consider the main gap, the new emerging contaminants that we are going to study, and we have to some limit about this. For example, we are talking about microplastics in different ways, in different situations. But what is the contribution of microplastic in indoor air quality or new emerging contaminants that we don't know? So the main gaps regards from the policymaker about the mind, and from the chemical substances about the new emerging contaminants that we have no idea about of this effect.
So there are many known unknowns, and there's many unknown unknowns when it comes to indoor air quality. I mean, it's been quite a deep dive when you look at all these volatile organic compounds. There's something like more than 900 volatile organic compounds. So I think there's a lot of research to be done here. We will stop our question and answer portion for today. We'll do some marketing now for you. We have our next webinar, and actually I would like to make one more comment there. Some of the things that we touched upon today: accessibility, equal access, inequality in indoor air quality. A lot of these topics have been answered with the EDIACI webinar series that always incorporates one of the Ideal Cluster members, and is really an outshoot of kind of what we're doing in the Ideal Cluster. So just a shout out there to look at our YouTube channel, which you'll have a link to soon. But with that, we're excited to announce our next webinar, co-organized with the Learn project, on the 21st of March at 10:30 CET. We always do it at 10:30 CET. Don't hold your breath, implementing effective ventilation strategies for healthy indoor air, which will explore how energy efficient ventilation and cutting edge filtration technologies can protect vulnerable populations and enhance indoor air quality. For more information and to register, please use the link I'm copying into the chat now. I should have had that ready, so do forgive me, but okay, it is copied now. It is in the chat. I hope to see a lot of you there. We also encourage you to become a member of our vibrant community by joining the Synergy Project community, the EDIACI Project community, and the broader Ideal Cluster community. I'm going to leave this QR code here for the moment for you to sign up, and giving it 5 seconds. There's lots of QR codes to scan, so please have your phones out, ready to scan every single community that we have. Next is the Ideal Cluster here, which I'll leave open for you for a little bit. There's the LinkedIn channel and the X channel. I'll give that another 5 seconds. Okay. And then these are the EDIACI social channels as well. So hope you can join, see more of the webinars that we'll be hosting and other outputs from the project as well. And with that, we can all breathe. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to our panelists for their invaluable perspectives, to you, our audience, for the engaging discussions that brought this event to life. And with that, we conclude today's session. Until next time, stay connected and informed, and wishing you all excellent air quality, both indoors and outdoors. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks a lot.